So we just said the process of Eved Ivri and the laws of Jewish slaves. Now, it's important to note that the Jewish view on slavery is very, 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 very different than it's not slavery. It's really not the same thing. A slave had a lot of rights, and it wasn't forever. It was only for 60 years, and it was definitely not something that was considered ideal. And if you look at Rashi, which I didn't bring you, but you're welcome to take a look, Rashi explains how Eved Ivri in Judaism was really a rehab program, meaning somebody who was in debt, often somebody who was in debt because he had transgressed and he had to pay and he couldn't pay. This is one of the ways to kind of pay his debt, to make money.
And it wasn't an idea of, in slavery, you punish them, you give hard labor, it's not that at all.
And they were treated very well. And Chazal say, kanalo even kanalo adon, meaning buying a slave was like buying a master, because Jews had to take really good care of their slaves, meaning it really, really was a rehab program. It was more like a foster home than a slave. Obviously it wasn't children, or it could have been people who are legally not children, but it might have been also teenagers, whatever. I'm just saying it's very, very different than the way we look at slavery today. Even though it's called Eved, it's Eved from the word Oved, meaning work. It's not really slave. It's a work program. It's really not slavery. Anyway, so a person who becomes an Eved Ivri, he works for 6 years, and in the 7th year he leaves. And if he comes with a wife, he leaves with her. If his master gives him a wife, that means that if his master gives him a shipcha knanit, meaning a non-Jewish slave is a little bit more similar to slavery. That also, Jews had very strict rules about how to treat their slaves, also the Knani slaves. But when it says ishto, the case would have been that the master would give him a woman to have children, so that there would be more children slaves. So if he loves her and he wants to stay with her, then
maybe he would give him a Jewish person, and he would give her
not Jewish,
meaning a non-Jewish, so that he could have slaves come from that.
Okay. I'm just explaining what it means when it says that he gives him a wife, so that doesn't have to happen. But if it happens and he wants to stay with her and wants to stay with the master, then he stays, and then he comes and they pierce his ear, but that's like really considered not a good thing. Okay, and I think it's really interesting to think why this is the first law brought right after Matan Torah, and I think it's probably because Am Yisrael was a nation of slaves, right? And Hashem is saying you are now entering into a new, not slavery, but a new, program, and we don't want slavery. And this is if you do end up in a situation where there's a slave, it's limited. And it's not forever, and if it is forever, that's really not good, right? Piercing the ears, statement of like, this is not good. And Rashi brings a midrash that says that it's saying, your ear that heard Hashem at Sinai, you shouldn't be doing this, meaning it's really not considered a good thing.
I think also it's to tell the Jew that what it means to be a master is not what you experienced as your master, and that's right.
I agree, this is very true. But I think also it's telling them you are slaves to Hashem now. You shouldn't be slaves to anybody else. I think that's part of the statement. But I agree that even when you have a situation of slavery, it's not going to be like that. Yes.
You should not use that as your model.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I think that's what really the identity was. It was not just that you did something wrong and then therefore you became a slave. It was also the fact that you had to be indebted to that person, a lesson that you yourself had to do. If he did something wrong,
for your actions.
If he did something wrong with you, also didn't pay attention to what people were doing around us, and it's for both.
Yes, you're saying that there's communal responsibility for any kind of situation. I think also the person who became a slave didn't become a slave to the person they were indebted to. They became to someone else, and then they paid. I think it's usually not the person they were indebted to.
I think it depends. You don't have to accept the slave.
I agree. You think it was? Maybe there are different situations, but I think it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. And then we have the Amaivriya, which is the female version of the Eved Ivri. And it's also very important to realize that the Amaivriya is not a slave.
What's the word?
Ama Ivriya. So Ama Ivriya, the situation was that a family was very poor, maybe in debt, and they have a girl who's a very specific age. She has to be between 12 and 12 and a half. That's the only time it's relevant. Okay.
Oh, that's in so many things. That's the window.
Right? Anyway, so the father chooses to set her up, meaning he knows that she's not going to find a shidduch after she's 12 and a half for whatever reason, because they don't have dowry, whatever. And they find a family that will buy her and to later be for her later to be a wife. Meaning it really was not a woman's slave. It was a very, it was like setting her up in a marital situation. Now, because she was this age, whatever, it's not marriage yet, they're like all these laws, I don't remember all the details, but like she can't actually be married until she's that age. Anyway, it's a very short window. The girl?
Who? The girl, or let's say in the family, if he sets them up in this family and does something like that, like, so where does she go?
I'm assuming that the parties agree. You're right that she might not have agreed, and there are actually special laws about a woman. There's something called mi'un. So a woman who becomes a wife under the age, and again, I think it's back in this window of age. I hope I'm saying all the details right, but there's something called mi'un, and there she could just say no, and then there's no divorce. Like it just gets canceled. Meaning there's a way out. It's annulled, right? I'm trying to remember if mi'un is maybe until 12. Maybe I'm getting the numbers wrong, because mi'un is not specifically about this law. Mi'un is a law in general, that if a child is married underage, then she can then annul it. But I don't remember if the annulling is until 12 or until 12 and a half also. So maybe that's not relevant. Anyway, whatever it is, she really has to be treated properly. And it says, if the guy, the Adonai, which again is going to be her husband, doesn't want her, then he cannot keep her and just mistreat her. He has to, it says, I'm just reading inside, he can't just sell her. So if the plan was that he would marry the son, then he has to treat her like any Jewish woman. If he marries another woman, so meaning he has to treat her properly. He has to take care of her. And there's a whole machloket about what these three mean, but the classic thing people say is sherak is you have to feed her, clothe her, and have relations with her. Meaning she has to be a regular wife status. Even though, this started not in a classic way, she's a wife. Okay? So if he doesn't take good care of her, then she's free to go.
Interesting. You hear the terminology acquire a wife. And I always wondered what that meant. How do you acquire a wife? But this is acquiring.
In the Torah, even a regular marriage is called kinyan. So the word acquire, I don't like it, but it is very similar to the word kinyan. There's actually, there's a lot of modern day questions of whether kinyan is actually acquire, or maybe it's a deeper connection. But yes, acquire a wife.
There are many ways that you can, and it's not the traditional way that we're used to. You fall in love with somebody and you both decide together. No, you could be a young boy, and one day all of a sudden you find out that your parents made a shidduch for you and you've acquired a wife.
I think in general marriage was very different then than it was. It was, it was financial. It was sometimes, political. Like it was a deal. It was like
That's where the term yichus comes from.
In halacha, yichus has other meaning, but yes, yichus is a term in halacha. Yichus, if you know who the parent is, and the parents, they're like normal Jewish kosher people, but yichus is anyway. Like if you don't know who the parents are,
not like what they modernized it with.
So you know what? It's actually kind of related, because in halacha in original halacha there was a law that you're not allowed to marry someone who is a ben or a bat nida, meaning that their parents didn't keep tarat and mishpacha. And today we don't follow it, but it's a machloket. It's a big machloket, and I think you kind of connect to that because it's very sad. But I think that's. Yichus means much more than that, and you want to know whatever. But I think a part of it, like there's Haredi aristocracy that will only marry, but there's also basic Haredi that will marry Bali Tshuva, and I think today it's already cultural, but I think originally it came from this machloket in halacha. And there are different opinions, and with Moshe Paskins it's okay, but it's not so simple. I think today so many of us are bnei nida that we just marry each other and everything's fine, but anyway, okay. So that's the end of Evet Ivri. And then we go into a whole long list of all kinds of situations of interaction between people. People hurt each other, makeh ish. And if so the beginning is really murder, right? If somebody hit someone else and they end up dying, so they're motumat, they're punishable by death. Basher lo tzada, that's bishogeg, then they go to the ir miklat. And then the last case is somebody actually planned to kill, and that's really the real, rotzech b'mezid. We have three levels of rotzech, right? Maybe manslaughter and murder. Then we have a lot of laws. If you hit your parents, you die. So if you steal a person, kidnapping, that's not good. There's a whole list. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but then there's a whole long list of all the details of when people fight and somebody is hurt. So the Torah Mamash has a whole detailed laws of like what you have to pay a person who you hurt. There's different components. You have to pay, you have to pay for their pain, you have to pay for their medical bills, you have to pay for the work they're missing. Like the Gemara really from this goes into a lot of the different shevet and anyway, boshet, how embarrassed they were. It sounds a lot like, the modern legal system that you have to deal with all these different aspects.
I feel like this is really the proof that he's connected. Like,
that it went into all the nitty gritty.
Because meaning that he knows us so well that he's giving us a guideline on how do you act when these things do happen. You roll humans, things happen. Whatever.
And now what? Right.
And now what?
Right. Anyway, so then this is also where the famous ayin tachat ayin, shen tachat shen, which we actually don't do before, right? But an eye for an eye, that if somebody hurts somebody else, I'm kind of running through this. And also it's important that at the end of the day, it says that if somebody hurts their eved, then they go free. Like you're not allowed to beat up here. Okay, the next piece is really the basis of the whole of I want to say Bava Kama, one of the Bavot, the shol, the bow, the different situations of your responsibility in terms of neziks for another person. If you have a shol, if you have an animal that hurts somebody else or destroys their property, so you're responsible. So that's also if you dig a pit in the middle of the street, you're responsible for anybody who falls in that pit. So that's what it talks about here. And then
is this where it talks about a geda, prediction or
it says Kiftach ishbo oichrebo loichasenu v'nafal shamashor chamor v'alav harishalem. So it says that if you make a pit and you don't cover it or put something over it, then you're responsible. It doesn't say you have to do that. It says you're responsible if you don't. Are you talking about makeh on the roof?
Yeah.
So that's not here. That's in Kititze. That's in Tvarim. But it is very similar. This parsha, like a lot of these laws are either here or there.
Okay.
Yeah, there. Yeah. Okay. And there's actually one more interesting thing here. There's so many interesting things, but there's a din here if somebody's coming to steal and let's say somebody comes to my property to steal something from me and they fall and die, right? Or they fall and are hurt. Is it my responsibility, right? So it says end of the meme. It's not my problem. Meaning if somebody comes, I think the real case is if I shoot them, right? If somebody comes and I see someone entering property and I shoot them, but he's only coming to steal me, not to kill me, but it's not considered murder. Okay, but that's only at night. If it's in the daytime, then whatever. It's different. I'm going to skip a little bit, and it also has a Shabbat Avodah here. The laws of like returning things that belong to other people.
Oh, I have a question.
Yeah.
Oh, I have a question. This is coming right after Har Sinai, right? After the real basic tenets of life. And I would think that this group of halachot that are being given would also be very basic tenets of forming a society, of kind of putting together what it's like to have to live together.
I think that's what it's saying.
So I'm going to ask, do you think that's what it's saying?
Yes,
and then later on, as we get further in, we get further refinement, we get additional things.
Yes, I think this is bedrock. Yes. I think this is definitely bedrock. It's also, this is how you set it up. And also, I was just coming to that it talks about really soon. Did I miss it? Where did I write this down? There's like the structure of like being Yeah, it's not yet. At the end, it talks about how the legal system has to be honest. And anyway, yes, it is. It's setting up the structure of the legal system. That's what it is. And I think it might even connect to right before Ma'amad Har Sinai. So Yitro was talking to Moshe about appointing Sarei Me'od Sarei Alafim, and I think that it kind of connects to that also, meaning you have to appoint people, but you also have to set out the rules and the foundation of how they.
Right, so this is function. Like basic 101
yes,
stuff.
I think so. Yeah. Okay. Then we also have together with the Shabbat Avodah, we also have what's it called? Borrowing, the laws of like borrowing a shomer, like if I cause damage to somebody else's belongings, was I borrowing it? Was I not borrowing it? What my responsibility is.
I wish you would have said this at my house. Two daughters, one that is very like needs to clean everything. There's another one that everything has to go lucky. And when she was in my house, she wound up taking my other daughter's sweatshirt, which she thought was my husband, thinking she just found from her father. And of course, like she doesn't like to expect food in it. She was full on fight. The one that bothers her, like, what's the big deal? You can't take it, and if you do something to it,
then it's then it's on you, right?
Like, so now I can show her.
You could show her again. I'm skipping a little bit, and what I do want to read is there's the laws of loaning money, and it's in Perek Kafet Pasuk Dalet. So it says, "Im kesef talvet ami." So literally, it sounds like if you lend money to someone from the Jewish nation, lo tieh lo kenoshe lo tisim lo neshech. So you're not allowed to take neshech. I can't think of the word. Interest. Thank you. And also, you have to be really careful. You have to, if they have collateral and it's their only, it's the only thing they have to wear, you have to return it. Like, you have to be very, very sensitive with halvaot, with loans.
People don't realize it also falls into things you borrow. Like if you take, I learned it.
If they need it back.
Meaning, like if I go to a neighbor and I have to say a cup of sugar or 2 eggs, but then someone should go and just buy a whole bag and give it back. She said, you're not allowed to do that. She says, because if you're giving them back more than what you borrowed, it's even like giving back interest, and you're not.
Who said this?
We were learning like Mara, like not Mara, but like parts of it.
Yeah, I think that it depends, because I think that if your neighbor is in a good relationship with you and you're always borrowing back and forth,
you're supposed to say,
it's a gift.
You're supposed to say that, I know you only want me a cup, so I'm just going to get it.
Okay, I hear you.
It back. You have to be clear about it.
Mm-hmm. To make sure it's not interest. Okay, I hear you. I have to think about it.
Let me know, because if it's not, I always try, after I learned that, I try to be adopted, and you also have to give back. Like sometimes we'll borrow things
and not give back.
And we forget to give back. You also have to be, unless the person says take it, but you really don't
I think again that it really depends on the relationship. Like if next door neighbors borrow an egg and everybody knows that nobody's worried about that egg, I think it's different than if you borrow a kilo of flour that I think everyone assumes you have to give back. Like I think there's like an inner kind of like system of assumptions that I agree that you should try to be makbid always to give back what you take, but like sometimes you borrow a potato, they really don't want the potato back. Like I think that it's important to also be.
You give it, you have to say, don't worry about it. Really, I don't need it back. Mm-hmm. I think that it's not what you're supposed to. So find out.
Well, what if you do need it back? So you say, yes, I need it back.
Meaning that if I didn't say to you, don't return it, you are obligated to have to return it.
Oh, I see.
So
I just think that, I'm happy to look into it, but I think that it's really important in a relationship to make sure that things are okay. And I think sometimes when people borrow things back and forth, and sometimes there could be, there could be discomfort and people might feel like you're always borrowing and not giving back. So I think you're right that it's important halachically and in terms of communication to be makbid. Now, I think that it's a more communication oriented thing than halachic thing, because I don't think that these, whatever, I'm happy to look into it.
I think both, like, if I learned to study don't know.
No, you don't know. I agree. No.
So I don't think you can do that.
No. You have to be careful.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I just wanted to say though that this idea that im kesef tavet ami, so Chazal say that it's not if, it's there are certain aims in the Torah that it's a tzivui, meaning it's not saying if you happen to lend a Jew some money, then this is how you do it. It's saying, please lend Jews money. And there is a really beautiful Sefer Chinuch on halva'ah that he explains that halva'ah is kind of like tzedakah, and maybe even better than tzedakah, because hopefully, somebody who's having a little bit of trouble and you lend them some money, they'll be okay. I guess it doesn't always work that way, but ideally we'd like to think that, and then they don't have to ask for money. And it's kind of like, the step before, it's kind of like, preventive medicine. And he says that it's a really good mitzvah to lend money. And it's interesting that lending money is not a simple thing. And sometimes it gets very complicated and sensitive. And we know that that the whole Bruzvul thing had to do with the fact that people weren't lending money because of Shemitah, because they don't get the money back. But lending money is a big deal in Judaism, and it's better than tzedakah.
I understand, but if you want to do like that, I can and say, I gave something that's my micro. Can you do that?
So that's a really interesting question. I think that it's possible to say, I think sometimes it's part of someone's kavod to say, I'm returning my loan. I think you have to be careful with it. Meaning, it's funny, before Shemitah, so I heard this lecture. There's a woman who is really into making Shemitah relevant. So one of the things that she did was she said, Shemitah Ksafim, so we don't do it, but come on, let's do it. So she said last Shemitah, or the Shemitah before, she decided to choose someone that she was going to say to them, I'm shomet your loan. And then, so she chose someone who she felt like is in need, and she told them, you don't have to return my loan. And she said the person never talked to them again. And she said she felt like it was not comfortable to that person. They wanted to return their loan. It became weird. So I think it's just important to be sensitive. I think that it is important to, if somebody really can't return a loan, and you could say to yourself, I'm the batter, and then they'll decide whether to give it back or not, right? But I think sometimes telling them is not always going to be kind.
But then I think that if you're not asking for it back, that is being and realizing money so if he didn't want to have it back, and that's your own.
I hear. I just mean that in the interaction has to be sensitive. No, right. Yeah. One of the projects she did, which I think is really cool, and I think this is very similar to the original Shemitah Ksafim, is she turned to some big organizations and asked them to cancel out certain debts. And I forget what it was, if it was the electric company or whatever. And they did. They picked certain people that had a really big debt, and they canceled their debt and let them start over. I'm not sure if they canceled the whole debt or just canceled the fines, whatever it was. She decided that was really a really good implementation of Shemitah Ksafim. I don't know if she got donations to cover that. I don't remember exactly all the details, but that was one of her things. Anyway, and we're actually getting to Shemitah in a minute. But he said, okay, so it talks about relationships to leaders and not, and also there's a few laws here of you're not allowed to be a bear witness in a lie, you have to, you can't be a false witness. And also, like we said, the court system has to be fair. So both it says, don't, it's interesting, this is, so it says you're not allowed to follow the rov if it's wrong, but in general, we follow the rov, which is an interesting statement, right?
Say that again, we're not allowed to.
It says, meaning if the rov is saying something wrong, and ra, you can't follow the rov. The
law?
The rov is the majority. The majority, okay, right? Yeah. But in general, we do follow majority, meaning most of the legal system is based on voting, and we follow the majority. Yes. Oh, yes.
Talking straight to
you. I'm not going to get into politics.
No,
yes.
We're not. Just nice lesson.
Right. And then again, we have this whole piece about that you're not, legal system has to be fair, and you're not supposed to bring someone out as innocent if they're guilty, and you're not allowed to take shochad. I can't think of the word. Shochad. No, bribes. Thank you. And it says that you don't realize how much the bribe is just an important pasuk. Shochad So even if you're very wise and very righteous, it's very hard. It's very hard because it totally blinds you. And there are many stories in the Gemara about how they were so careful to not take any gift from the people that they were supposed to judge. And if they did get a gift, they would like remove themselves from the case. And
this is the halacha from the judge can't be somebody who maybe gamble or
I think that's a witness. It's not
is
here.
Is it a witness or is it
a witness can't be somebody who, it says in the Gemara that either gambles or mafrich yunim, and there are two explanations there. One is because that's some form of stealing, because gambling has some level of you're taking something from someone when it's not so clear that they were planning to give it. And the other is there's an idea meaning if they're not hardworking people that are part of the world, that's also an issue. So there are two ideas of why we don't accept the witness who's gambles. I mean, you could say that if a witness can't be, then kal v'chomer a judge, but I think the Gemara is talking about a witness. Okay, and then inside this paragraph, it talks about shochad, it talks about the legal system, it goes into shmita. And it seems like here, shmita is really in the context of building a social system that's balanced. And shmita appears again in Parashat Bahar, and here the context, it really seems to be very, very ethical, social. There's something about Shemitah that's like a social equalizer, meaning no people are rich or poor because everything belongs to everybody. In the other piece, it talks more about Kili Haaretz and Hashem is in charge, but here Shemitah kind of has like two angles. Here the angle is very social. And after we talk about Shemitah, then it talks about Shalosh Regalim, which I think is really interesting because Shalosh Regalim seems so out of context. You have to come see Hashem 3 times a year. But I think the part of what it's saying is, why do we have to come see Hashem 3 times a year? Because, first of all, that's where the Beit Din sits, right? The legal system is in Yerushalayim. And there's a statement here that there has to be some kind of center, meaning, yes, there has to be a system, and part of the system means there's a center, and even though people live in other places, 3 times a year they have to come together. That's kind of like an opportunity to like strengthen, the connection to that system.
I remember I also read something I threw with Rashi. It said that the road that people would take to go on the Shalosh Regalim, if they would go to Yerushalayim, would be also on the same path as where the class was. Because you didn't know, there were no signs to tell you how to go. So people would knock on people's doors and therefore to ask, where is this? Where are you going? And then they say, oh, we're going in, that would bring more people to come along with. Mm-hmm. So it also, before you mentioned your class, and maybe.
Mm-hmm. And that piece ends with that there can't be chametz on the mizbeach, and lo tavashel b'di b'chalev imo. So this is one of the few times it mentions lo tavashel b'di b'chalev imo. Just interesting comment. Lo tavashel b'di b'chalev imo, I think always is mentioned in the context of the Beit Mikdash. Now, halachically, obviously, we also keep it in other contexts, but it's just interesting that it's the context as the Mikdash or the Mishkan. And then the next couple paragraphs talk about how it sounds like this is like saying all of this is a preparation for you to enter Eretz Yisrael. So I feel like there are 2 points in the Torah that we're really like about to enter and then don't enter. So here is one. In the beginning of Sefer Bamidbar is the other. But it says, Hineh anochi sholach malach lefanecha. And when you go to Eretz Yisrael, you have to be careful and not be affected by the goyim. And that's it really sounds like, okay, we're going in. And this is the system. We're building, like you said, the legal system. We're setting out, we're going. And then we know that doesn't happen right away. But that's where we're at right now. And then the end of the parsha, the last parak in the parsha, parak of Dalet, is what we call Brita Aganot, which is really like another either version or angle or addition to Mamat Har Sinai. Okay, so Brita Aganot literally means they're like these containers, probably made out of, I don't know, stone. That what happened was there was a whole ceremony, and it's very interesting that it's not clear to the Parshanim like what this is. So Rashi, first of all, let's look at it for a second. Okay, so Brita Aganot Perek Dalet has 2 parts. The first part talks about how Moshe goes up to the Har, and it talks about this like ritual that it's like a korban. They have korbanot, and then they put the blood over here, and there's a brit. Okay, and this is where Am Yisrael says Naseh v'nishma. Okay, it says V'yamru kol ha'am asher diber Hashem na'aseh v'nishma. Okay, this is right. We talked about that. We're going to find na'aseh v'nishma this week.
And isn't this weird because the next parsha is about building this time where they do the korban already?
It's interesting what you're saying. It's very interesting.
Is this out of context? Later part?
So hold on, okay? And then the second half of this perek talks about how Am Yisrael received the Torah and how they saw Hashem, and it talks about how Hashem is Eshochla. I forgot. Also, the first one says also there's like the Veyut Hashem. Anyway, there are two parts, and it seems that this is kind of like another Mamad Har Sinai. So is this another one? Is this another description of the same thing? Okay, so I'm going to bring a couple ideas, but what Rashi says is that the first part happened before Mamad Har Sinai, and the second part happened after, meaning he's saying that we're out of order now. Okay, the Ibn Ezra doesn't accept this, and he says, no, all of this is after. Now, I'm going to suggest that it's not before or after, it's the same, it's one and the same, meaning it's another angle, like kind of like another version of Mamad Har Sinai. Like we heard one version, and now we're getting another angle of the same event. And I think that they sandwiched the mishpatim, all these laws between the two pieces to say, this is it, like you were saying. These laws we got at Mamad Har Sinai. And the reason I brought Rashi here, that we're going to look at in a second, let's look for a second, okay? So Rashi on your page says, Ve'ela mishpatim, which is back to the beginning of the parsha. Kol makom shene'emar ele chasal et harishonim, ve'ele mosif al harishonim. So he says, why does it say ve'ele and not ele? So right, we're starting a parsha with the vav, right, which is connection, right? So Rashi says it's a continuation. And then he says, ma rishonim misinai, af elu misinai. So Rashi says that what this vav is trying to stress, to emphasize, is that all these mitzvot were given at Sinai. Okay? So here he says something else that we're not really going to go into, but he's saying, and I think that's part of what I'm trying to say, that these mishpatim, the Torah is trying to show us that all of this came down at Sinai. Okay, and I think we talked a little bit last week about how the mitzvot, the 10 that were given, like they're not necessarily so much more important or more central. You know, maybe they're kind of like, you know, shorashim that all the other things branch from. But the statement is, Parashat Mishpatim is really a part of Mamad Har Sinai. Okay. Now, beyond that, I think it's very interesting that part of the difference between this representation of Mamad Har Sinai and the one we saw last week is that last week we talked about how it was very passive, right? Something was like dropped on them pretty much, right? And here they're more active. They bring a korban and they eat it, and they say kol asher na'aseh nishma, even though they said that last week too, but there's something much more involved. And it's interesting when after the korban, when they eat this korban, so it's a machloket, that's a good thing or bad thing. They're eating now, right? Are they just eating lunch? Or are they eating a korban? But either way, I think there's this representation of Mamad Har Sinai is a more active, more interactive version. Everything written in the Torah is still Torah shebichtav. Okay, so if it's here, it's Torah shebichtav. But yes, the Masoret tells us that all of the Torah, including Torah shebe'al peh, was received at Sinai. And there are many long books written about how that works. And you can come on my father-in-law's birthday every year and hear more about it, right? Every year he talks about this because it's a fascinating topic and it's endless. Yes. And it seems clear that we all agree that it was all given at Sinai, but what does that mean, right?
But then I think that this makes sense too, because now that it's after, you need the mishpatim, you need all that. So the Fukim and the things you don't understand here is like, you know, it's kind of like putting it out and like, you know, how to do it and how to follow it.
Right. And if I take your words and I take them back to Rashi, and Rashi says it happened at Sinai, and we want to say, duh. I mean, it all came down at Sinai, right? So I feel like there's a strong emphasis here that the details came down at Sinai, meaning it wasn't just an event. It wasn't just the 10 Commandments. The details, and Mishpatim has a lot of details, and I think it's lo stam, the details came so quickly. Meaning what I said about Am Yisrael being like, oh my gosh, you know. So in a minute I'll say that they probably didn't say, oh my gosh, I said thank you. But I think that, that there's a reason it came down right away, and there's a reason it's placed here between, right, sandwiched between like the bookends of Har Sinai. What I do want to read.
There also was two different sets of results that we didn't know.
Right.
So one is also indicative of the first and the second.
So for sure, they're indicative of different things. When we get there, it's in Parashat Ki Tisa, so we'll talk about how a lot of ideas in Chazal talk about how the second Luchot are kind of representative to Torah Sheba'al Peh. Okay. I feel like it's important to realize that there's a dichotomous definition between like division between Torah Sheba'al Peh and Torah Shebechtav, but there's also, if you think about the idea of Torah Sheba'al Peh and Torah Shebechtav, there's also kind of like a range, meaning a lot of Hasidim and a lot of philosophers talk about how Torah Sheba'al Peh is something very set in stone, very, it's from Hashem, and it's not so involved. And Torah Sheba'al Peh is something more involved and more developing. And to a certain extent, I think that the whole Torah is on that range, meaning where does it end and where does it start? I mean, when we talk about Moshe telling people things that Moshe is saying that, right? So Moshe is the one who gave us Torah Shebechtav, but I feel like the division is not as clear cut philosophically as the halachic division between Torah Sheba'al Peh and Torah.
But I think it also is not that in Mishnah, like Hashem gave you certain things that He's put aside, and then when it talks about like the she's on our own, I think about Al-Peh really
is more
connect to
okay.
Try to learn it on our own and to figure it out.
I hear that. I just want to say a comment on the Na'aseh V'Nishma. Even though in our like culture, Na'aseh V'Nishma is like the example of accepting without understanding, I think in the Pesukim it's the reverse. I think in the Pesukim, when Am Yisrael says Kol Asher Diber Hashem Na'aseh, that's I'll do everything you say. And the Na'aseh V'Nishma is the more involved response. Even though I know that Na'aseh V'Nishma has come to represent the, we'll do whatever you say no matter what, I think in context, it's the reverse.
Right. But I think
it doesn't matter, because I think the Torah has to have both. I mean, it doesn't matter which, right?
Well, Nishma, the hearing thing, there's a whole world built around what that means. Yeah.
Okay, let's read a little bit. Okay. So first I'm going to read Rashi, and I love this Rashi. So I'm in the second part of Rashi, Asher Tosim Lifnehem. אמר לו הקדוש ברוך הוא למשה, לא תעלה על דעתך לומר, ישנה להם הפרק וההלכה ב' או ג' פעמים, עד שתהיה סדורה בפיהם כמשנתה, ואיני מטריח עצמי להבינם טעמי הדבר ופירושו. So he says, don't think that you're going to tell them these laws, and they're just going to repeat it without understanding it. So he says, לכן נאמר, אשר תשים לפניהם כשולחן הערוך ומוכן לאכול לפני אדם. So Rashi is saying, what is Parashat Mishpatim? Parashat Mishpatim is spreading out this table and saying, this is, it's not just these few things you have to just repeat and understand. No, repeat and not understand. Parashat Mishpatim is giving like a more in-depth explanation, and that's what halacha is. Meaning a person who wants to do Hashem's will, right? So we could say, I want to do Hashem's will, but oh my gosh, what does He want from me, right? And Rashi is saying it's such a blessing that Hashem gave us all these details. Now, I feel like today, often, people are very frustrated by all the details. But I think the place Rashi is coming from is amazing, right? Mm-hmm. I want to know what to do. You're telling me what to do. Thank you so much, right? Mm-hmm. Or like, I feel like with kids sometimes, there are things that you like assume they know, and then it's something you tell them, like, oh, okay. Sometimes it doesn't work that way, but sometimes it does.
Meaning, you don't have a halachot to see what you're really challenged with, and therefore you have a hard time.
Okay.
With it,
I hear. No, I'm not saying that it's not a struggle. I'm just saying that Rashi is really looking at the halachot as Shulchan Aruch Lifnei. That's what the term Shulchan Aruch comes from, right? It's based on the Midrash, not just Rashi, but this idea that the halachot are Shulchan Aruch, that it's spreading out the table, so like you can just sit down and eat your meal, like that's the idea. It's like ready to go, It's like anyway. So I want to read a little bit of Sfatim. I know we only have 10 minutes. We're just going to do the beginning. Okay, and he's commenting on the pasuk that we just read. Ve'el hamishpatim asher b'su b'fnehem. Amar Adoni Moris Keni Zal. My father said, I always forget if it's his father's grandfather, but anyway, Higid b'shem harabbi Pershischa. He's saying this in the name of a different rabbi. Sheyu mishpatei Hashem kodem chayut ha'adam. וזה לפניהם. So he says, what does it mean לפניהם? So we just said לפניהם means I spread this before you, right? He's saying something else. He's saying the mishpatim have to come before my chayut, before my energy, before my whatever. והוא עניין הקדמת נעשה ונשמע. And this is what נעשה ונשמע really means, saying נעשה first. Okay, so he says like this. וגם ברש"י זה על מה הראשונים מסיני וכולי. So he's quoting the Rashi we just read, that is all from Sinai. ופירשנו על פי דברי מורי זקני ז"ל, שגם משפטי השם, אף שיש בהם טעמים, עם כל זה, כל הטעמים על ידי רצונו יתברך, והוא העיקר. והטעמים נמשכים אחר רצונו. So he says that often we divide between mitzvahs we understand and mitzvahs we don't understand. And part of what the Sfat Emet is relating to is the word mishpatim usually describes mitzvot that we understand, right? Meaning chokim and mishpatim, right? You've heard the term. So chok usually relates to something that I don't get it, but I just do it. And paraduma is usually the classic example of that, right? And these are mishpatim. These are things, like we said, it's a legal system. And I really read it and I'm like, oh, yeah, I can hear that, right? So usually mishpatim is a word that describes that. And the Sfat Emet says something about the mishpatim. He says, even though mishpatei Hashem seem to be something I understand, he says, shegam mishpatei Hashem, af sheyesh behem tehamim. So even though I understand the tam, it makes sense to me, right? Tam means reason. It also means flavor, which I think means it's palatable, right? I could do that, you know? Tastes good to me. Im kol ze, kol hatehamim al yedei ratzono yitbarach, vehu ha'ikar. So he says, even though these mitzvot, I get it, the real thing, the ikar of the mitzvah is it's Ratzon Hashem. והטעמים נמשכים אחר רצונו. He says, the טעמים make sense to me because it's his will. וזה שכתוב שהם מסיני, שאף שהשכל מבין שכך צריך להיות, עם כל זה, הכל לידי שכך גזרה חוכמתו. So it says, even though, yes, I understand it, but why do I understand it? Because it's Ratzon Hashem, meaning the reason it makes sense to me is because it came from him. וזה שכתוב אתה כוננת מישרים, פירוש על ידי רצונו יתברך, נעשים משפטיו ישרים. So he says, because it's Hashem's will, that's why it's good. Can we just read one more sentence and then you'll ask? וכל העולם מודים ומבינים שישר משפטיו, שכל הדת נמשך אחר רצון השם יתברך. I just want to read it a little bit more, okay? וכן צריך להיות ציווי השם יתברך קודם לשכל האדם וזהו לפניהם. So he says that in order to relate in the right way spiritually to the mitzvot is to say first I want to do Hashem's will. Then if I'm coming from this assumption, right? If I'm saying Naaseh v'nishma, right? He's saying this is Naaseh v'nishma. I'm saying whatever Hashem says, I'm doing it. Then I'm going to listen. And then he says, I didn't read to the end. We're just running out of time. He says, when I come in from this, through this, then I hear it, meaning then I understand it. And the idea he's saying, I think is a very interesting idea. And it's very contrary to what we usually think. I think often we think that when I'm objective, I can hear things more clearly, meaning, I don't know if this is right or wrong. I grew up with it, right? I don't know, right? People who really can tell me if this is good or bad are people who grew up from the outside and come in. We're always so impressed. I remember when I was in Cleveland, so there were these two ladies that wrote a book about modesty who weren't from, and they were like the hit of all the high schools all over America. And then they became from, and then I was like, oh well, it's all over, right? So obviously I can only hear about modesty for someone who's not from, because that's so much more impressive, because like they believe it even though they're not on the inside, right? And I feel like it's often true. Like we hear ideas about Torah being true from other people. We're like, oh my gosh, this might be right. And he's saying it's the opposite. He's saying in order to really hear, to really see the truth, we have to have bought into it. And I feel like he's kind of like fighting against the idea that we're in a loop. Meaning often we say, I'm in, so I'm not objective. He says, no, you have the best information, because the fact that you're in, that means you can really see the truth. That means you can really hear it. He says you can't hear it until you're in the groove. In the groove. And I think that to a certain extent, he's kind of right on many levels. And I'm going to give an example. And I heard this podcast recently. I highly recommend it, about tzniut. Have you heard of the Orthodox Conundrum? First of all, it's very cool. The Orthodox Conundrum. Go on Spotify, and there's a series of all these like topics in Judaism, very interesting. And Shana Goldberg, I don't know if you've heard of her. She lives in Alon Shvut. She teaches Migdalos, and she broadcast a podcast recently about tzniut and in English. And I think a lot of people were listening, and in staff at the school I teach at, we were all talking about it. And why was I saying this? There must have been a really good reason, but no, tzniut. No, but I can't remember.
Did you
Yeah, I'm sure it did.
Oh.
I lost my string.
Because you were saying also, like, that these people that
I know, but now I can't remember what I was going to say about it. There was something I was going to say. Oh, sorry. Maybe it'll come to me. What was I going to say? It was good.
You'll think of it in the car
when I go home. Anyway, it will come to me. I forgot what I was going to say. Hold on. So I was going to quote something she said, but I can't remember what it was I was going to quote.
The Orthodox Conundrum?
Yeah, it's actually very good. In general, it's a good series. But I'm coming back to us, and I'll go back to the idea that this Fatima is talking about. So he's saying that in order to really appreciate, I remember what she said. She was talking about educating about tzniut. And she was saying that often we jump into the details and we don't get the bigger picture, right? And like she was talking about how the word tzenua, what it means, and it's also about like living a certain style of life and whatever. And then you can talk about the details. And she gave the example of Shabbat. That like if you just talk about borer and you talk about how you're not allowed to sift like this and this, and you don't even know what Shabbat is, then you're like, what in the world? But once you've experienced the Shabbat, then whether or not you understand how the laws of law fit into there, you see it differently. Context. And I think the Sfat Emet is saying something similar, but on like a more theological level. And he's saying that in general, the mitzvot are more palatable once you've said Amen. And when you've said Amen, then you hear the beauty, then you can hear the tamim, then you can taste the tam. And if you're going to be from the outside, then it's always going to be tainted with that, with that space or with that discomfort that you have of not choosing to enter. And I feel like this is such an important idea because I feel like often we don't take ourselves seriously enough. Like we often, like the idea, like I said, that we are so awed by the way people see things from the outside. And I hear it and I understand why. And often you need confirmation, right? You need someone to say, you're right. Validation. Thank you. That's a better.
Can I tell you, just by us showing up here to learn, proves that because we're from, like I was born to be from. And I could say everything that I learned and everything that I was taught, I know everything. But now at my age, I'm coming here to say I don't know everything, and now I really want to understand it. And you're never really sure, and you always can. You have the guidelines now, you can go through it when you're ready to do it.
Right. We were just talking about one of the girls in the seminary was saying. She said, I grew up this way. And one of the girls said, no, you're from. It's okay. You count. Like, she's like, but I've never even had like a challenge. Like I don't count,
Well, the other thing that this does is that if you come in, if you enter like I did later in life, after a certain point, and I say that I'm in, so and I see the beauty of certain things, but there are still other things that I don't get, and maybe I'll never get them. The point is that I bought the package. You buy the package because you like whatever it is you like, and so it comes with it. And
my question I had before was, the thing going on here, is this being taken over to the Shigan Skating that the later told should do it?
You're asking if it's the same Shigan Skating?
Meaning that all these
they go up together, right?
Is this almost now giving it over to them?
Or did they get it directly? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, or is it that this is thanking them and they're the ones that give it over to them?
So just look, in the first half, nothing's given, right? The first half is a ceremony that they have to be a part of. There's like a delegation. When he gets the Torah, I don't think he's there, right? He goes up and he tells his Kenim, you stay here, and then he goes up by himself. So he gets the Torah by himself. Like the first half, this Kenim have to be involved in because it's like a commitment and they're the leaders. The second half, when he goes up himself, he says, Atem shvu lechem b'zeh ad asher ashuv. I'll be back. Bye.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Which is also interesting because in the first version of Har Sinai, it's not clear where Moshe is when the Torah is. It's not right. It's not so clear, and there are different opinions. there's opinions that he was with the nation, the opinions that he was up on the mountain, which I think is interesting to discuss what that means. Anyway, have a great week. No.
So someone who lives in Mr. Ryan and walked around sporting
at the hotel? It was on purpose? Like it was at a protest? Lovely.
And she's now going to it was actually, I didn't even know it was a law. If you do something anti-religious against anybody, it's federal law.
Really?
Yeah, so she's arrested right now. I don't know, what will happen, but
I don't know what the consequences are.
Like I just went on Charlie's demo. They're posting the facts by the car. And just because of that, I think she covered herself up. But I just feel like if this is going to be the 14 seconds of fame, never.
I never. Totally never.
It totally backfired. Anyway, thank you. Either I will see you guys next week or not.
Me too.
Okay.
If not,
For sure. So I forgot to turn this off. Yes, I try to record when people aren't here. So I'll send this and I'm gonna take this to them. There must be a way to turn this off, right?